Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to Saturday, amazing session of Ramadan Mubarak. Everyone, welcome for joining us on the interactive and on YouTube. I can't believe we're just in the last, handful of days for Ramadan, and it's been really wonderful, being able to stay up late, not sleep, not. It's I don't know, it's amazing this time. But I am so excited because tomorrow we have an incredible event. I want to say thank you to Mafaz, who's on our interactive group, Mafaz Al-Suedan. Her father is going to be here, or not here, but on Zoom. We're going to have a Zoom conversation, and it's going to be incredible. I have to say, like, there are times in my life where I have been in just in the presence of greatness, and it's like one of those times where you just go, I have no idea, like, what I did to deserve being in such blessed company. I've had, the opportunity, for example, to have dinner with, Ayatollah Hossein Madarsi on one end, and then the Sheikh on the other, and just, like when you have these surreal moments where you look around and you're like, what in the world am I doing here, and how did I get here? And this is one of these moments. I actually, didn't know anything about Tariq al-Suedan, and so as part of my preparation, I was watching the series, and actually I want to really thank Dr. Sami Al-Arian for doing this Ramadan series on SIGA. SIGA is Center for Islam and Global Affairs, which is part of Istanbul Zaim University. And as you know, the Sheikh had a conversation with him last weekend about sort of his influences in life, and how his thought developed, and a lot of very, very interesting stories. And they have superstars every night for 30 nights during Ramadan. And so Dr. Al-Suedan was one of the people that he interviewed, and these were like, really meaty conversations for like an hour and a half, where they really get into like, what was your upbringing like, what were the things that influenced your thinking and your life experiences and stuff like that. So I watched the interview with Tariq al-Suedan, and I thought, holy cow, I had no idea like what an incredible person, incredible scholar. There's just so much to say, and I was like, okay, what did I do to, because I'm going to be moderating and having, hosting, I guess, with the Sheikh and Dr. Al-Suedan. So please pray for me. I need prayers that I can do a good job, because these are incredible people. And I would really encourage you, if you have the time, to go and watch these two interviews. These are the things that you really are grateful to scholars for, because obviously Dr. Sami, had the vision of capturing, these conversations. It's called Conversations in History. And, when he picked the 30 superstars in the Islamic world to interview and really get to know these people, this is such an important service for us as Muslims, especially people, like me. I'm a convert, background. I have no reason to know anything Islamic about any of our history or our scholars. So this was an incredible opportunity to just get to know a person who has done so much. So, Tariq al-Suedan has published 125 books, and he has 22 books in the pipeline. You hear this number and you wonder, how in the world can any human being write that many books? But when you hear his story and you hear what he's done, and his convictions, and his analytical ability, and just his whole life has been dedicated to, as he says, spreading knowledge, to revive the Muslim Ummah. And he has analyzed his way into determining why this is his priority for him as an individual, and all the things that went into him arriving at this decision, and what he felt was really important, confronting our world, and what he felt he could contribute. And it's an incredible story, and so much of it, interestingly, is really important for what we do here, because I would say we are also, on the path of trying to revive the Muslim Ummah, and what better way to do that than through knowledge. And so I'm so excited to bring these two people together, because I think that they, are giants beyond giants, and they are beautiful, incredibly talented, gifted, you know, I don't even have words. They're amazing people that I think we are blessed to have alive in our lifetime, that we can actually say, you know, we lived in the same time as these two people. So please join us, and if you have a chance, you know, look it up on the SIGA website, and watch both, you know, Dr. El Suedan and the Sheikh's conversations. I think it'll be an incredible education and preparation for our conversation tomorrow. So it's a Zoom conversation at 1 o'clock Eastern time. If you get my weekly email, or just go to our website and you can actually register. I know we're close to capacity. I think it's like 100-person registration. We've already surpassed that in terms of registrants, but that's no problem. Then if we need to go overflow, we're also going to live stream on YouTube. So you won't miss it either way. And of course, we'll record it and make the recording available after the fact. So hopefully people can watch, you know, when they can. I think it'll be an incredible conversation. Okay, inshallah. And then the last thing, so I promised that I would give a little tidbit of book history each time if I think of it, and so I just wanted to share something.
What's the time for the conversation?
1 p.m. tomorrow Eastern time. So, and that's 8 p.m. I think we've set aside 2 hours for the conversation. So, and it's 8 p.m. Kuwaiti time. He's going to be joining us from Kuwait, inshallah. So, and thank you, Mafaz. That is just, it's going to be incredible. So thank you. Inshallah. Inshallah. So my very short book history for today is, you know, like we're in this library, and of course that when you want to find a book, you can't find it. So I had to actually go to Amazon and pull it up. So this is The Great Theft. This is the cover of the book that the professor wrote back in 2005. It was published. It came out, you know, shortly after 9/11. At that time, you know, people were obviously, I mean, I think it's one of those moments where everyone, if you were alive at that time and if you were not an infant, you remember where you were and what you were thinking and doing at the moment you learned what happened on 9/11. And there was a brief moment in time where people were really like, oh my God, who are these Muslims? And what is their belief system? And what would allow people to actually commit a crime like that? But it was in a positive way. People were curious because they didn't know anything about Islam. And so there was a window of opportunity where people were actually interested in reading, not with an Islamophobic eye, but with a genuine curiosity. And so this was one of the books that came out during that time, before the rise of Islamophobia really took hold. But also at that time, the other thing that really arose was this term moderate Muslim. Like everyone was like asking, where are the moderate Muslims? Why, you know, how could this happen? And it was one of these terms that was batted around, but nobody actually could define it or did define it. You know, it was just this feeling that, okay, moderate Muslim was a Muslim who wouldn't bomb things, right? Or kill people. But this is the first book that actually came out and, you know, defined what does it mean when we talk about moderate Muslims. Okay, now the cover. Anyway, The Great Theft. Interestingly, this book, if you know it, it's in 2 parts. The first part, it talks about sort of the rise of extremism and Wahhabism. So it helps to have people understand the landscape of, you know, the Saudi influence on Islam and the rise of Wahhabism and Puritanism. And, you know, it's a really important book that we actually received a lot of communication, like from, you know, rabbis and pastors and priests and stuff saying, you know, thank you so much for writing this book, because now I understand that this is an issue not of Islam per se, but of Puritanism in any faith. And so it was really helpful to, you know, try and place that in context. And then the second half of the book is actually a discussion of what is the difference theologically and also, I guess, in practice on major points within the Islamic tradition. So it starts with, you know, what is it that all Muslims believe, and then it goes into, you know, like what are differences, opinions on things like women, you know, in relationships with non-Muslims, jihad, war, knowledge, the place of God, these kinds of things. And what the professor would do is he would write that people really, their beliefs can fall on a continuum from sort of extremism to moderation. And you could fall on, you know, at different places on that continuum, depending on what topic you were talking about. And so the book was written largely for non-Muslims to understand Islam, but also for Muslims to sort of check where they were, because at that point Wahhabism was really the primary force if you would go to any masjid, and people were espousing Wahhabi views without even knowing that they were Wahhabi views. So it was a really important book. But Also, the really interesting story about the history of this book is it was published by Harper San Francisco, and the original text for The Great Theft, like they wanted a book that they considered a beach read. Like after the fact, they would, they liked having books that were people could take with them to the beach and sit and whatever. So Dr. Wilfeld is not someone that you would actually go to ask for a book on a beach read. So, so the truth of the matter is, he wrote like a 400-page manuscript intended to be The Great Theft. That was the original text for Reasoning with God. And it was in Reasoning with God was primarily in 3 parts. Like the first part was sort of symptoms of the problem confronting Muslims, things that would go on in Islamic centers, for example, that would show this sort of strange unreasonableness. The second part was defining the problem, and then the third part was solutions for the problem. So when he turned in the manuscript to Harper San Francisco, they read it and they were like, what is this? This is like such an academic book. This is not a beach read. And so he took the manuscript back and then retreated like literally in a month and wrote The Great Theft, like without anything, like sort of off the top of his head, and submitted it. And I think they still felt that that was a little bit too academic, but he really tried to dumb down the text for The Great Theft. And then this book, then the manuscript, then sat and he worked on it for over 10 years, like the next 10 years, because he had, in his view, dumbed it down. And so he actually wanted to bring it back to sort of, an acceptable level. And then it was published in 2014. So that's how it exists today. So that's the history of that. But they're both really important books. The Great Theft is actually a really, it's adopted in a lot of courses on Intro to Islam. It's not a dumbed down book by any stretch. A lot of people find it actually challenging. So, but they're both really important for the Islamic education. So that's my book story for today. And I'm looking forward to another incredible halaqah. Thank you so much. And look forward, hopefully, to seeing you tomorrow.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحان الله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وطوه إحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. I think Grace said it all about tomorrow, inshallah, but I just want to underscore that, inshallah, I think this will be a very special occasion, a very special conversation. Dr. Sweden is in very high demand, I think I have about a couple of thousand followers. He has like 1 million followers.
No, 18 million.
18 million? Yeah, so he's doing us a great favor by even talking to us. Sort of having some pity on us. No, he's the real deal, and we're just very fortunate. I mean, I don't. We had, of course, an inside track through Mafaz. I don't know if it would have happened if it hadn't been for Mafaz. I doubt very much. If I had 18 million followers, I wouldn't pay attention to someone with 2,000 followers. I'd say, get lost, man. Don't have time for you. But, alhamdulillah, maybe I have 18 million followers in Jannah, in heaven. Maybe. But then he will have like 50 million followers up there. So, it's a losing race. No hope. No hope. Give up. So just tune in for whatever it's worth. Inshallah, we are doing Surah Al-Ra'd. And I am full of apprehension because Surah Al-Ra'd is a very layered surah and demanding. and I just pray that I can do it justice. So just pray with me. So first, there are a number of reports that Surah Al-Ra'd was revealed after Surah Muhammad, which is a short surah. And if it was revealed after Surah Muhammad, then that means also it was revealed after Surah Al-Hadid, which we covered. And there are there are several reports that it was revealed right before Surah Al-Rahman, which we also covered. So, Hadid, Muhammad, Al-Ra'd, Al-Rahman. The issue, though, is that there are also convincing reports that Surah Al-Ra'd was revealed in Mecca. If it was revealed after Surah Muhammad, then that would mean it's a Medinian surah, that it was revealed in Medina after the Hijrah. But if the reports that say that it is primarily a Meccan surah, or totally a Meccan surah, then so some scholars, like Zamakhshari, for instance, and others, simply said, we don't know if Surah Al-Ra'd was revealed in Mecca and Medina, and there is no way to know. Which makes it a very interesting surah, because chronologically, we either place it between Al-Hadid and Al-Rahman, and then we sort of know what was going on when it was revealed at the time in Medina. Or we accept the reports that it was not revealed in Medina at all, and then it's likely that it's a late Meccan surah. And it would be likely that it was revealed right before the Isra, and a few people said perhaps even right after the Isra. But this points to a reality that we have with the Quran, that some surah, we really don't know whether they're Meccan or Medinan. And there's a thesis that it actually originated with Orientalists, with German Orientalists, that said that you can tell the difference between Meccan surah and Medinian surah by their style. And some Muslims adopted that thesis and repeated it. But I think that's largely erroneous. I know what style they're talking about. I mean, yes, the more technical, legalistic style of revelation is all Medinan, but yet there are many surah that were revealed in Medina that bear the exactly the same style of the Meccan surah. I mean, for instance, the Rahman, which was revealed in Medina, right? Allahu Alam, Allah was best. And I couldn't resolve this issue through scholarly research. As much as I've researched this question and went through the reports and went through who said what and why and under what circumstances, and traced the narrations of the reports in hadith, in books of tarjih, and so on, I couldn't resolve it as a matter of transmission. I couldn't decide whether it's Meccan or Medinian. However, the dhikr that I performed on this surah, and this is, to be very clear, through dhikr, so it's not something that I can demonstrate through rational evidentiary means, left me convinced that Surah Al-Ra'd was in fact revealed in Medina, and in fact that it is a surah that was revealed between Al-Hadid and Al-Rahman. And Allahu A'lam, and Allah knows best. And as we will see, Surah Al-Ra'd will raise a number of issues, but the main theme of Surah Al-Ra'd is to leave you reflecting and pondering deeply on the notion of change and how change takes place and the right means for progress, as inshallah we'll see. But at the same time, it's a deep reflection upon nature itself. And you recall that when we talked about, was it Ar-Rahman, when we talked about a Quranic Kawni? Right?
That was Al-Hadid.
Is it Hadid?
He talks about Rahman. Also?
If you remember the concept of a Quranic Kawni, that there's the written Quran and then that there is the created Quran, and the created Quran is nature. And that we found, yeah, it is in Rahman and it is in Hadid, both.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm wrong.
What?
I'm wrong.
What is it?
I think Shah.
Rahman? No, but I mean, even in Hadid talks about how Hadid was sent from to earth itself, and it invites it. But I think we talked about it with Ar-Rahman. I think that's when we flagged it. I remember that you were on your trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
He experienced it.
Yeah, that's when you experienced the Quranic Kawni, because yeah, that's how it stuck in my mind. But it's raised repeatedly, and Surah Al-Ra'd, subhanAllah, it presents us in the most pronounced fashion with the idea of a Quranic Kawni, with certain key concepts within that large idea, or within that general idea. Okay. Alif Lam Mim Ra, there are Ar-Ra'd is one of 6 surah that starts out with Alif Lam Mim Ra, and we've talked about the meanings of Alif Lam Mim, especially Alif Lam Mim in the past, but and so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Alif Lam Mim Ra occurring at the beginning of Al-Hadid in particular, what did I know? Many Quranic commentators argued that it stood for An Allah al-Malik al-Rahman. An Allah al-Malik al-Rahman. I am Allah, the Malik, the Supreme Ar-Rahman, the Merciful. But of course, as we've talked about before, they always go back and say, but we really don't know. Allahu A'lam, right? So, ألف لام ميم را تلك آيات الكتاب والذي أنزل إليك من ربك الحق ولكن أكثر الناس لا يؤمنون الله الذي رفع السماوات بغير عمد ترونها ثم استوى على العرش وسخر الشمس والقمر كل يجري لأجل مسمى يدبر الأمر يفصل الآيات لعلكم بلقاء ربكم توقنون. So it starts like a lot of the surah that begin with these letters or a variation of the letters, affirming an absolute and general truth in the most resolute and decisive fashion. These refers to the book itself, are the signs of the book, the ayat al-kitab, sent down by God in truth. And with the full realization that when all is said and done, most people do not believe. We encountered this before, but again, you find some fascinating writing in Muslim sources about the difference between how one perceives oneself to be Muslim and that belief without shirk is something else, and that in fact it is a challenge that most people do not have the type of introspection to purify their iman from elements of shirk, as we'll talk about one. And this ties to a message within Surah Al-Ra'd that we see in a lot of surah telling the Prophet ﷺ again and again and again that do not expect that everyone will follow you, and do not expect that everyone will believe you. And in fact, it is the natural state of things that there will be many who deny you. And beyond that, beyond it speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, is a reminder to Muslims themselves that as much as you believe that you possess the truth, and as much as Allah says it is the truth, that does not mean that humanity will accept the truth. And in my view, that's also a clear affirmation of the principle of non-coercion. If coercion goes against the vein of everything that you find in the Quran about whether humanity will in fact accept what Allah's message is or will not. raised the heavens without pillars, without perceptible pillars. Now, in the books of tradition, there's always a discussion whether when you say raise the heavens without pillars that could be seen, does this mean that there are pillars, it's just that they're invisible, or does this mean that there are no pillars? And most end up arguing that saying without pillars that could be seen doesn't mean that there are pillars, but that simply pointing our attention to something that I think the modern mind can understand even much better than the medieval mind, that what surrounds the earth, the atmosphere that surrounds the earth, is a very unique and special thing. And it's not just the course of things, or the normal course of things, but that in fact it is very aptly created. Yeah, it involves an intricate balance for that atmosphere to be created, that envelops, which envelops the earth. Okay. So, and that Allah created creation, and then this expression, istawa ala al-arsh, or mounted the throne. Again, theologically, you have these long discussions about what does it mean to say that God has a throne, and what does it mean to say that God mounts the throne. Mas'alat al-istiwa, as they call it. And that to imagine that there's a throne that resembles anything like human thrones, or that God mounts in any way that resembles the way people mount something, is unbecoming of divinity. But then, what do these expressions mean? And does God use language that, in order to bring things closer to the human mind, but in reality cannot be understood in human terms? There's no point in going through because these debates, either you have to be a specialist in theology, or you have to be interested in sort of medieval philosophical ideas. But the gist of it is that Allah's throne is like no other throne. And when Allah mounts the throne, it is a metaphor for Allah now has taken charge, or Allah is involved intimately managing Allah's creation. This, of course, goes back to what we've talked about before, the medieval idea of the disinterested deity, which was very popular in pre-modern times, that there are gods who could create and forget, or gods who create and abandon, lose interest at some point or another. And that the Quran consistently places itself in the opposite camp, that this is not a God that creates and abandons, or a God that creates and forgets, or a God that creates and becomes distracted, as many of the mythologies, religious mythologies of pre-modern times would hold. يدبر الأمر يفصل الآيات لعلكم بلقاء ربكم توقنون. How did they translate? No. God made the sun, the moon, each running to an appointed term. That's normally how they translate that. لأجل مسمى, that they run according to a divine plan. That God directs the affairs, expounding the signs, so that you may be certain of meeting with your Lord. Okay. Let me rephrase the translation. So, يدبر الأمر, God is intimately involved, fully engaged. يفصل الآيات, that nothing in this count, and this is core to the message of Surah Al-Ra'd, nothing in this creation is happenstance or simply a product of coincidence. So what you see, or what you might perceive as signs, in fact, they are all according to the way Allah manages this creation. And then لَعَلَّكُمْ بِلِقَاءِ رَبِّكُمْ يُوقِنُونَ. Here you have a grammatical debate, if you will, that some have said that what this is saying is God intentionally engages creation to generate signs which human beings can reflect upon, so that they may realize belief, or they may attain belief, that Allah is purposefully generating signs for you so that you believe. That the Quranic Kawni, as we will see, is one where God is constantly saying, here's another sign for you to believe in. Others said, no, it is that God creates signs, stop. These signs means that God runs creation. We call them ayat simply because every creation is an ayah. But then there is a separate statement where Allah is telling human beings, if only you would believe in your Lord. It's like saying, I run everything so meticulously, and everything is run with clear purpose. So what's wrong with you? Why don't you believe? So you have these two, and I don't think there's a way to resolve the grammatical argument one way or the other, but for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. Okay. وهو الذي مد الأرض وجعل فيها رواسي وأنهارا ومن كل الثمرات جعل فيها زوجين اثنين يغشي الليل النهار إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. So Allah is the one that extended the earth and then made in the extended earth anchors. Normally anchors are understood to be mountains. That literally these mountains hold the crust of the earth in place. Because elsewhere Allah says that Allah anchors the earth so that so that it might remain stable. And the flowing rivers, and then we come to this issue of, let's see how they translate it first. Every kind of fruit God placed therein two kinds. God placed therein two kinds. That من كل الثمرات زوجين اثنين. This again gave serious pause. Is it that God is saying that of every fruit there are two kinds? Or is God saying that the law of creation is a law of coupling? And if it is the law of coupling, is it what they call tanasubiyya or ad-dad? And I'll explain it in a second. So, if you say that of every fruit, two kinds, empirically, that's problematic. Because do we have of every fruit two kinds? I don't think so. I think there are many kinds. How many kinds of mangoes are there? Right? How many kinds of bananas? How many kinds of apples? So it is not. Some said, well, the coupling here refers to male and female, that all plants, and that some plants, the organs for reproduction, meaning male and female organs, occur in a single plant. So the coupling still holds true, because it doesn't matter if male and female is in two separate plants or in a single plant that has the means of pollinating itself. That's possible. I mean, I'm not an expert in this to know if scientifically that's, but the idea that everything reproduces through a process of some form of insemination or pollination or intervention, either on a single plant or two separate plants. But some said, well, but here the language itself doesn't say I've created male and female or created organs of reproduction in a thamarat. It says zawjayn ithnayn, which creates the idea that there are constantly two types of forces, if you will, positive and negative, or in our language today, that, you know, a DNA code has two parts to it that comes together. Of course, they didn't know about DNA codes, but they described it, said, well, the language would connote that the law of creation itself is the law of duality. That you have bitter and sweet, you have light and dark. What were some of the other? You have cold and hot. You have abyad wa aswad, darker and lighter. And that this duality, as we'll see, is important to understand the nature of creation itself. We get even to, as we'll talk about in a little bit, whether human beings themselves are subject to this law of duality. Some went beyond duality and said, but it's not just duality, but it is contrasts, specifically contrasts. And like bitter and sweet, dark and light, up and above. So for instance, they said when you take a seed, a single seed, part of the seed becomes roots, underground, and part goes above ground. And they saw this law of Adad, as a contrast, as essential for understanding even spiritual forces, as we'll see. That we'll talk about this in a second, that even when it comes to understanding yourself, you must think in terms of your own duality, your own contrast, your own force and its antithesis. And we'll talk about that in a second. So, this idea of contrast you'll find, like for instance in Maturidi, who is, although obviously as you know Maturidi dissented from the Mu'tazili school of thought, but he's still very much influenced by the idea of contrast as essential to the concept of duality itself. Which was very widespread among a lot of Mu'tazili theologians. God, I can never memorize where the button is. All right. And that in the same duality you find in thamarat. And thamarat is not necessarily just fruit, but thamarat is anything that grows. A thamar is anything that emerges and produces and lives. A thamar doesn't necessarily need to be tasty or edible. A thamar doesn't necessarily need to be good. Some thamar you can eat and it kills you. Right? Some thamar is used for firewood. Some thamar is used for building. Some thamar is used for whatever. Now, those who either ashab al-tanasubiyya, the duality, or the adad, the people who argued about contrast, say, in the same way that Allah points our attention that the thamarat is immediately followed by layl and nahar, night and day, and that the way that night and day evolve into each other sort of literally like rolled into each other in a seamless and constant fashion, that if you reflect upon that, and now we have the concept of a Quranic Kawni, if you read that as a created Quran, rationally you'll understand that this is not happenstance, and this all belongs to an owner, that all of this belongs to someone who owns it. And if so, then you will also understand that those, and this is now verse 5, that those who are so resistant, those who think that the idea of resurrection is so far-fetched, are in themselves very disingenuous. Because for Allah, the same God that constantly creates the law of life and death, dark and night, bitter and sweet, Jannah and Nar, is a God that easily can roll life into death and death into life. And so resurrection is not an issue, it's not a challenge. That in fact, as easily as Allah creates everything that you see, that, and some theologians went even further in saying that what Allah is pointing our attention to is that in the same way that the duality of life necessitated death, death necessitates life. That the cycle is not complete. And that Allah created a law in creation itself that every death of a thing leads or feeds into a life of a thing. Everything that dies gives life to something. And that Allah created this so that we may reflect and realize that our own death is only a step towards our own life. Okay. No, did I skip an ayah? Yeah, I skipped an ayah, sorry. وفي الأرض قطع متجاورات وجنات من أعناب وزرع ونخيل صنوان وغير صنوان يسقى بماء واحد ونفضل بعضها على بعض في الأكل إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يعقلون. Notice here, this is 4, which is okay, so we spread out the earth, placed mountains and streams, upon the earth there are neighboring tracts, vineyards, sown fields, and date palms, of shared root and not of shared root, watered by one water. And we have favored others in bounty, truly in that are signs for people who understand. Okay, the only thing I'll say about this translation from the Study Quran is, what is the point of pointing your attention to this? The idea is that, look, the substance of this earth is the same. The basic elements for creation are the same. But yet, out of these basic elements, this the ard, the ground earth, as it, out of these basic elements, you will find that the topography varies greatly, and that desert is next to a vineyard, that is next to whatever that it is. The variety in topography, there is great diversity but also great unity. It is the same constituent elements again and again, and that the element for life, the secret of life, is always one and the same, and that's water. And that whether the plant is poisonous or the plant is bitter or the plant is sweet, it is always fed by the same water. Sinwan wa ghayru sinwan, that in palm trees, palm trees can share the same base, and it's remarkable. You see like 5-10 palm trees all with the same base, and they actually share the roots, and it's quite remarkable because they don't conflict, and they grow and thrive, or they grow individually. That's what Sinwan and Ghayr Sinwan means, that they either a shared base or not shared base. And that, note again, Surah Al-Ra'd is inviting you to the created Quran, a Quranic Kawni, that even whether plants have a shared base or not shared base is no accident. It is a purposeful, intentional creation by the Lord, who engineers it in this way. And that if you reflect upon the miracle of the fact that all is fed by the same nectar of life, water, but yet the results vary enormously, as diverse as fruits are and as everything that comes from water, you will see that, again, this is something that testifies for a creator. وَنُفَضِّلُ بَعْضَهَا عَلَى بَعْضٍ فِي الْأُكُلِ. What's interesting here is that the tense that Allah uses here, Allah doesn't say you prefer some of it over other in eating, but Allah sort of adopts the internal voice and says, and we prefer some of it. This is important for Sufi-esque tafsir. In Sufi-esque tafsir, they notice every time Allah speaks to us with the singular, or not say, but what is it, first tense of the we, because they see this as tawadu min Allah, that as it is an act of Allah teaching us modesty, sort of stepping down, being one of us, if you will, and saying, I understand that I've created part of your diversity, is that as much of diversity in creation that I've produced, you yourself are diverse as creation is, because you prefer this and that, and you don't know why you prefer this and that. Some of you like apples, some of you like oranges, some of you like sweet, some of you like bitter, etc., etc. As so many theologians say that human taste, taste itself, the fact that you prefer, you say you have your favorites in food, is itself proof of a creator. Okay. Then we come to the point, verse 5, where in Surah Al-Ra'd, where, why are they, in fact, if there is any surprise at all, the surprise is that they find it hard to believe that there will be reincarnation for human beings. Or resurrection, rather. Okay. And of course, as you notice in 5, that verse 5 has the threat that in resurrection, those who will be resurrected in shackles because of their disbelief. Okay, so here selections from the tradition, as I often do. So this is about, in the context of verse 4. So first I'll read it in Arabic and then I'll paraphrase it. Where it says, after it says Sunwan wa ghayr Sunwan, that there's shared bases and isolated palm trees, and that we prefer some of it over others in issue of taste, and that in this are signs for people who reflect. So the quote here says, فلا بد من التفكر في هذه الأمور ويقال أخلاق الأبدان 10 أشياء: سلامة الصدور، وسخاوة في المال، وصدق اللسان، وتواضع النفس، والصبر في الشدة، والبكاء في الخلوة، والنصيحة للخلق، والرحمة للمؤمنين، والتفكر في الأشياء، وعبرة من الأشياء. And then it is وعن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and then it has a hadith. So what he's saying is that when Allah invites us to reflect on these issues, there is an a priori issue, which I find very fascinating, because it's what you can call the ethics of reflection. The larger context is that he's arguing, why is it that some people reflect and they reflect upon these things and their heart melts and this is the beginning of their path to the Lord. They look at palm trees, shared bases, unshared bases, and it moves their soul, their heart, their being. They get goosebumps, while others reflect and say, oh, that's interesting, and they move on. So why is it that we have this? So he says, well, because there are ethics for reflection. And listen to this. So these are the ethics that he is saying, that those who reflect upon the signs of the Lord, Al-Quran al-Kawni, created Quran, and in fact it becomes their path to the Lord, have the following ethics. Salamat al-Sudur, a clear heart, meaning they're not vindictive. وسخاوة في المال, and they're generous. وصدق في اللسان, and they're truthful, they're not liars. وتواضع في النفس, they're modest. والصبر في الشدة, they are patient when hardship inflicts them. والبكاء في الخلوة, that when they're alone, they shed tears. والنصيحة للخلق, they care enough to give advice to people. In other words, they're not disinterested in other human beings. وَالرَّحْمَةِ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and merciful towards believers. And after all of that, they are capable of learning, extracting a lesson from things they reflect upon. What's fascinating is that you're combining ethics such as being truthful or being generous with the capability to think correctly. That if your ethics are wrong, your thinking will be wrong. وَيَسْتَعْجِلُونَكَ بِالسَّيِّئَةِ قَبْلَ الْحَسَنَةِ وَقَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمُ الْمُثُلَاتِ وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَذُو مَغْفِرَةٍ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى ظُلْمِهِمْ وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَشَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. That here he's talking, Allah is talking to the Prophet specifically. Good question. I don't know. Can you guys check Ismail Haqqi, if the quote is from Ismail Haqqi? Unless the computer people can figure out like where the quote came from.
Yeah.
This, yeah.
You just said hold my beer.
Sorry guys.
My non-up beer.
No?
Yeah, it's haqqi.
It's Haqqi? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Okay. Okay. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the Prophet and saying, I know that they tease you, sneer at you by saying, okay, bring on the punishment. This verse 6 is one of the reasons that some argued that this is Meccan, because this type of challenges where the Meccans would tell the Prophet, or if you're a prophet, go ahead and bring the punishment, took place in Mecca. But it also took place in Medina when the Prophet would invite tribes around the Medina area. I mean, it didn't stop. Anyway, and although خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمُ الْمُثَلَاتِ, that although there are many examples of nations that in fact have sustained God's wrath, but yet they challenge you specifically. In 6, that comment, which becomes important for later on for the rest of the surah, وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَذُو مَغْفِرَةٍ لِلنَّاسِ عَلَى ظُلُمِهِمْ, that although people in general, believers and unbelievers, are often unjust, God is constantly forgiving. And that parts of the law of creation, in the same way that at the beginning of the surah it tells us that most people will not believe, is that God is constantly forgiving many of the wrongs that believers and unbelievers commit. And that this is part of the namus, part of the law of creation itself. Okay. ويقول الذين كفروا لولا أنزل عليه آية من ربه إنما أنت منذر ولكل قوم هاد. So the disbelievers, there is a report that says that a group of disbelievers, some say that they were from Mecca, some say that they were from Thaqif, other reports say that they were from Ta'if, I believe, anyway, that they would tell the Prophet, well, Moses parted the Red Sea, Jesus resurrected the dead, bring about a miracle like the miracles of the Bible or the biblical prophets. And that they would explicitly say the Quran doesn't count as a miracle. Now, in theological sources, the response of theologians or Quran commentators to this is that some argued, well, the Prophet did have miracles like feeding an army out of a single dish, or like water flowing between his hands, in other words, putting his hands somewhere and then water springs forth. But that these miracles were, in the eyes of these disbelievers, insufficient. That they didn't rise to the level of the miracles of biblical prophets like Jesus and Moses, and that that's why I discounted them. This is one response. Another response is that, in fact, none of the miracles that the Prophet reportedly performed, physical miracles, have been reliably reported. And that, in fact, the Quran was the Prophet's sole miracle. The idea that the Quran is the Prophet's sole miracle is not the popular idea in modern times. But in pre-modern times, it had a far greater backing than it does in modern times. But what theologians spend a great deal of time on is responding to why it was necessary that the Quran be the Prophet's miracle. And what they say in short is the following, is that miracles of biblical prophets impressed the people who witnessed them. But anyone that did not witness them, they became mythology. The minute a miracle is reported from one person to another, leave alone from one generation to another, it is myth. You either take it or leave it. And what happened throughout history is that people largely leave it or embellish it and change it to co-opt the myth to what their cultural religious beliefs were. And that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ came with a very different paradigm. And that is an end to the magical stage of things, to a continuing miracle placed in a text, which is the Quran. Now, that is precisely why the entire edifice of Islam is hinged on whether you center yourself on the Quran or not. If you are a Muslim but the Quran is not significant to you, we have a problem, because it is the living miracle and the continuing miracle, and the miracle justifies the entire prophecy of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. So, and as we said, the idea that humanity has now evolved to a new stage where Allah will put a continuing revelation and a continuing miracle in their midst, but Allah will no longer send prophets to perform tricks that dazzle and that earn loyalty for that prophet for a period of time as that prophet lives, or whoever witnessed the miracle. And that the challenge that Allah puts before humanity is the challenge of tafakkur and ta'aqqul, which Surah Al-Ra'd begins with. That now the challenge is that you reflect upon the continuing miracle and that your faith be based on that reflection. But here is where a lot of theologians then come and say, well, are most human beings capable of proper reflection so that they can end with iman? And the interesting thing, this is what I have noticed, and I might be wrong, because I've researched this for about 10, 20 years, but it needs more research. I've noticed that those who require ethical virtues for correct thinking tend to be skeptical and pessimist, and say that in fact most people will not end up believing. While those who ignore the issue of ethical virtues for proper thinking, they're not impressed by that idea. And they think that reflection is a matter of just coming to an obvious conclusion in their opinion, that creation is created. And if it's created, it has a creator. And that's not very hard. And that you don't need virtue to see how obvious that is. But I think I'm fascinated by the whole idea of ethical virtues for proper rational thinking. Although, to my knowledge, no one has actually studied it. Okay. وَيَعْلَمُ مَا تَحْمِلُ كُلُّ أُنْثَى وَمَا تَغِيضُ الْأَرْحَامُ وَمَا تَزْدَادُ. This is, what every pregnancy is. مَا تَغِيضُ الْأَرْحَامُ is whether a pregnancy is longer or shorter, whether a pregnancy terminates prematurely, that this is all within Allah's knowledge. There's also some Muslims said, well, modern science can find out the gender of a baby. So what's the big deal about God knowing what's in a... well, when Allah says, يَعْلَمُ مَا تَحْمَلُ كُلُّ أُنْثَى, God knows what every female carries. God is not telling you, I just know the gender. I know what's inside. Meaning, I know the person. I know, you want modern terms, I know the genetical code of that baby. I know how tall this baby is going to be. I know how long this baby is going to live. I know how smart this baby is going to be. I know everything that there is to know about this baby. So, I mean, I'm not sure why I keep getting that question from young Muslims that, well, isn't it a problem now that we can know the gender and God, so doesn't that invalidate? Maybe it's just a lack of imagination, I don't know. Okay. عالم الغيب والشهادة الكبير المتعال. Although this is not the dhikr for this surah, but this phrase, عالم الغيب والشهادة الكبير المتعال, is a phrase that is a dhikr phrase. If you sit at night and repeat it a few hundred times, you'll see its power. Which is verse 9, nor of the seen and unseen, the great, the exalted, al-kabir al-muta'al. The only thing I just want to say that al-muta'al is grammatically not just the exalted, but nothing can possibly be supreme or higher to the Lord, which means it's a perfect way of summing up the idea that nothing escapes God's attention. Don't be tempted to think that any of it is not part of what God knows and what God plans. Okay. 10. Alike among you those who speak secretly and those who do so openly, those who lurk by night and those who go first. I don't know why the translations sometimes just always they deflate me. I don't know. Although the study Quran is a good translation, but the translations in general deflate me. I feel deflated when I read the translation. سواء منكم من أصر القول ومن جهر به ومن هو مستخف بالليل وسارب بالنهار. Yes, it is whoever speaks secretly or speaks loudly. Yes, it is how did they put it? Or those who lurk by night or go forth by day. It is, but the words are more pressing than that. It's as if God it's saying to you, you can't hide whether you say something or not. There are no secrets. Understand that in your relationship to God, there are no secrets. In Sufi Tafsir, they write a great deal about the fallacy of human beings thinking that although they say we believe, but they often, their attitude towards the self is as if they think that God doesn't know a certain thing about them. And so if they are committed a lot of sins, they are often say, well, we're embarrassed to talk to God because we've done X, Y, Z. Well, but God knows it. You're not keeping secrets. Or if they're tempted to commit sin, they often get a cognitive dissonance about God's perfect belief. So they pretend as if that sin somehow is not in God's complete radar. ومن هو مستخف بالليل وسارب بالنهار. This phrase, whatever dwells secretly or dwells unseen in the night, or whatever moves in the day, as we will see in later on in the surah, gains particular significance, because part of Surah Al-Ra'd, it's telling you that creation is much more than what you see. But with all the interesting puzzles about creation that Surah Al-Ra'd will present you with, that you have to understand it is perfectly accounted for and understood by the creator of things. Especially when you deal with dark forces. People often in their fear forget that nothing escapes God's knowledge and God's sovereignty. And the reason for the fear is the belief is shaken, especially when you confront scary things. After having told you that there are things that dwell in the night, secret things, mustakhf, meaning mustakhfin, you don't see it. And there are things that are sarib bin nahar, that move. And sarib implies also that they're unseen. They move in the day, but they're unseen. Comes the verse that is one of the verses that is most famous for Surah Al-Ra'd, in Surah Al-Ra'd. له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظونه من أمر الله إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم وإذا أراد الله بقوم سوءا فلا مرد له وما لهم من دونه من وال. So first the raw translation. معقبات له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه, which we'll talk about, but it's just a raw translation. Attendant angels that go in front of a person and to the rear of a person, guarding the person by God's command. God, truly God, alters not what is in the people until they alter what is in themselves. And when God wills destruction for a people, there is no repelling it, because apart from God, there is no protector. Because this verse is heavy, let's take a 2-minute break. I need a breather before I take on this verse. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Oh, where's Grace?
She'll be here in 1 minute.
In the intermission, are they back?
Yeah.
Should be.
Okay. In the intermission, my students convinced me that Arad is Meccan, not Medinan. So I changed my position from I believe it's Medina to I believe it's Mecca. Because the reasons he brought up are compelling. Okay. له معقبات من بين يديه. So there is, most scholars said that معقبات here means that there are angels that are all around you, and that these angels all perform tasks that often are protective tasks, and that to carry out God's will. And there is a hadith that even says that these, the hadith say as much as 10 angels for every human being. Not a very reliable hadith, but it's in the tradition anyway. There is another view reported by Ibn Abbas and adopted by commentators like Al-Asfahani, that say معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظونهم من أمر الله doesn't mean angels protecting an individual, but rather a very different meaning, that human beings mistakenly believe that they can overcome or avoid God's will, and that in fact nothing saves them from God's will, or nothing will change God's will. If we can't rely on the hadith that says that there are in fact several angels that are in front of you, behind you, serving to make sure that God's will takes place. The hadith itself is problematic. So then we go to the term mu'aqqibat, and له معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه. معقبات, between one's hand and behind a person, يحفظونه من أمر الله. Depending on how you construct يحفظونه من أمر الله grammatically, this could mean protecting someone with God's command, or protecting, or something that is against God's command. And it all depends on the grammatical construction. So some have suggested that معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه is a third alternative, and that is what a human being does, leaves traces, and that these traces they surround you. They are what is between your hands and what you leave behind. It's like ما جنت يديك, what you earn with your own two hands. So that's ما بين يديه, and that is why it is literally described as something that is right there in your arms, and what you leave behind you. and that these traces are what mark your course and will sometimes, but that regardless of the traces, God's sovereignty is supreme. I do believe, not because of this verse, but because of other things, that human beings are accompanied not by angels, but by at least an angel that keeps the record. That is not something. But I also believe that human beings have other attachments that are capable of accompanying a human being. Mu'aqqabat seems, between the alternative of angels that accompany you, sort of protecting you, and the idea that human beings think that they can overcome God's will, I tend to think that the third alternative is more consistent with the way the verse is. That it's talking about what the trail that you yourself leave. But yet God's will is supreme. Allah Alam, I mean, I'm not sure. I could be wrong, and it could be in fact referring to angels, but the idea that if human beings were in fact accompanied by a multitude of angels, it would seem to me that God would make such a point clear and would repeat it more than once, and that so the idea would be wouldn't be left to conjecture. The phrase is open-ended. I mean, معقبات من بين يديه ومن خلفه يحفظونه من أمر الله. But then note that the verse doesn't stop there, but it continues on to say that إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. And the majority of pre-modern commentators understood this to mean that if people enjoy God's blessings, God doesn't take these blessings away until they start changing and earn the loss. So if God gives you bounties as a nation, as a people, that you will continue to enjoy it unless or until such time as you do things that warrant taking these blessings away from you. That's the way that the majority of commentators understood it in the pre-modern world. In the modern world, a new understanding of this verse became far more popular. And that is a more positive understanding of this phrase, of this ayah. And that is, God only changes a people to the better if they change themselves. So the more modern understanding is often cited by reformers to say, well, until Muslims work to improve their own status, God is not going to help them. Until you become better human beings, well, things are not going to get better. Because God only helps those who help themselves. While the pre-modern understanding, it's, well, God is not going to take away blessings until you give cause for God to take away these blessings. I think both meanings are plausible, and both meanings can simultaneously be correct. There's no need; they're not mutually exclusive. If God gives the people blessings, God is saying that you will continue enjoying these blessings, but if you don't act justly towards the blessings that God has given you, they will be taken away. And at the same time, if you don't have blessings and you want blessings, you have to change ethically, morally, to warrant God helping you and giving you blessings. Now, if we understand this phrase in light of the term mu'aqqibat, mu'aqqibat linguistically can literally mean your trace, the traces you leave behind. Not just what accompanies you, as in angels or otherwise, but your legacy, your footsteps. And I think that's consistent. Then the first part of the ayah is consistent with the second part of the ayah, if it's understood that way. So it's like saying, under God's sovereignty, under God's full power, you act and you earn the consequences right between your hands, and you leave traces behind you of what you've done. And these mu'aqqibat are either good or bad. And if they are bad, that means that God will no longer support the blessings that you have, and you might lose them. And if they're good, God might help you rise and earn blessings that are deserved by your effort. And this way, we can resolve this whole debate that has taken place about this verse, about whether angels or not angels or so on. If mu'aqqibat is understood as your handiwork, your traces, then the second part of the ayah makes perfect sense. Everyone follow what I'm saying? And of course, what is often cited in the context of this verse is the hadith that if people see injustice and they don't act to prevent it, يُوشِكُ أَنْ يَعَمُّهُمُ اللَّهُ بِعِقَابٍ, that then Allah will allow, or Allah will permit all of them to suffer the consequences of punishment, suffer the consequences of injustice. And that, citing that hadith in this context, which is always cited, would make perfect sense. Because then mu'aqqibat is what you've earned. And if you allow injustice to take place, these are your mu'aqabat. And these are the consequences of your actions. You've allowed injustice to take place. You haven't stood up to resist injustice. You didn't stand to change injustice. And then God allows you to suffer the consequences thereof. And of course, when وَمَا لَهُ مِن دُونِهِ مِنْ وَالٍ, God's reminder that if you stand up to change the consequences of your actions, you must remember that your well, your ally, your support is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because it's always easy to forget that and to make these decisions about justice and injustice separate and apart from God's role, which I think is very problematic, obviously. Okay. هو الذي يريكم البرق خوفا وطمعا وينشئ السحاب الثقال. He shows you lightning and clouds forming, heavy clouds laden with rain. But then we get the most fascinating statement: وَيُسَبِّحُ الرَّعْدُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ مِنْ خِيفَتِهِ وَيُرْسِلُ الصَّوَاعِقَ فَيُصِيبُ بِهَا مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُمْ يُجَادِلُونَ فِي اللَّهِ وَهُوَ شَدِيدُ الْمِحَالِ. Okay, so here then the thunder, this is 13, let's see what's the thunder supplicates God or repeats hymns, as the Quran says, and the angels as well. And وَيُرْسِلُ الصَّوَاعِقَ then sends either lightning or storms, could be either, to afflict whomever Allah wishes. And yet they argue with you about God, although God is all omnipotent and all powerful. Shadid al-Mahal basically means God is extremely resourceful, if you want a literal meaning. Now here we pause again. Why? Because there was an ancient belief that thunder is literally moved around by angels. Some even believe that thunder itself literally was a living angel. And this belief made it into some of the commentaries. So if you read a lot of the commentaries, you'll find that they'll say, what God is saying is that the angels themselves move the thunder and send the lightning. And there's angels actively busy creating the thunder, moving the thunder to wherever God wants it to go, and sending the lightning. And some will, in Muslim commentaries, some have transplanted the idea that instead of thunder being a god, but thunder actually being a living angel. And they have a name for the angel and everything. Now, I don't think you're very surprised that I don't subscribe to that view. I don't think angels move the lightning and thunder, and I don't think there's. However, so then that phrase, thunder repeats God's hymns or supplicates to God, what does it mean? And it is understood angels repeat their reverence towards God makes them constantly supplicate, but we know that angels are in a constant state of supplication. But why mention the supplication of angels, the reverence of angels, in the context of mentioning thunder? We have to go back to what tasbih means. What is sabbaha means? Tasbih means tanzih, that it either pronouncing, articulating, or demonstrating the oneness and singularity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what tasbih is. That whenever you say God is one and God has no like, that is tasbih. Tasbih can be articulated by a rational being or can be articulated by any being. So if I take a tape recorder and I have it repeat subhanallah, that's tasbih, although it's not a living thing. If I teach a parrot to say subhanallah, that's tasbih. But beyond that, anything that attests to the oneness and singularity of Allah is in a state of tasbih. And Surah Al-Ra'd takes you to invite you to look, as we will see, to entire nature, not just as proof for rational thinking being of the oneness of Allah, but that nature itself testifies to tanzihillah. That nature itself testifies to the one and only. That this creation could not have been the product of a multitude of gods. And that this creation could not have been a product of an accident. And that thunder, if it invokes fear or trepidation in you, in fact, you must remember that it simply testifies to its maker, its originator in the first place. Now, angels do not have a choice when they supplicate the oneness of Allah. At least in most theologians, because they think that Satan was jinn, not an angel. And that because angels are not capable, unlike in Christianity. In Islam, angels are not capable of disobeying or rebelling. They don't have that choice. But in that sense, if angels do not have the choice, their supplications and tanzihullah is exactly the supplication of inanimate objects like thunder. Anything that does not have the choice to disobey by its mere existence and performance of the functions for which it was created is supplicating God and is in a state of tasbih. Now, in Sufiya's tafsir, we get the verse on Ar-Rad. Oh, before I get to the Sufiya's tafsir, I forgot something about the traditional tafsir. There are reports that are often said in the context of this verse that in Mecca there were people, their names were, I don't remember their names, Ibn Tufail or Arbad bin Rabi'ah, that they came to the Prophet ﷺ and that they challenged the Prophet, or they argued with the Prophet and fought with the Prophet and told the Prophet that if you're really a prophet, why don't you send lightning and thunder to strike us down? And that they continued to argue with the Prophet, and then that God punishes them by in fact sending a lightning bolt to kill them. At least kill one of them, and then the other guy got a boil on his face and died from a painful boil and whatever. And that's the occasion for revelation of this verse. And that's why it says that this report about Arbad and Tufail are not at all reliable. And so we cannot count on them as occasions for revelations. For I don't think that incident took place in the first place. Although Arbad and Tufail did exist, but we find a lot of reports that in fact Arbad or Tufail in fact converts to Islam, that some reports say that he died in a duel, that so they're just very problematic. But you'll find them in a lot of traditional tafsir. They'll tell you that these verses was revealed because God struck unbelievers with lightning as punishment. I wouldn't put much weight on these reports. So when it says وَهُمْ يُجَادِلُونَ فِي اللَّهِ وَهُوَ شَدِيدُ الْمُحَالِ, this is again in 13, that they dispute concerning God, that they say that this is in reference to the disputations of Arbad and Tufail with the Prophet. But as I said, not reliable. Okay, so then the Sufi asked tafsir. The Sufi asked tafsir take the reference to the lightning and the thunder as entirely metaphorical. And they say that, I might have actually, No, I didn't. Anyway, they say that it is a metaphor for the way Allah tests the human heart with thunderous events that cause extreme restlessness and anxiety. And that every thunder that strikes your heart is Allah saying, wake up and come to me. And that if you open your heart, what follows the thunder is the lightning of enlightenment. That when you get to the point where you say, God, I'm tired of being scared of the thunder of life. God, I open myself to you. God will send as if a bolt of lightning where you will feel closer to God in one instant, for 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, than you've ever done before. If you jump on the opportunity, you are on the path of taraqqi. If you don't jump on the opportunity, you go back to zero. So if you feel really close to God that day, but then the next day you decide, oh, I'm too tired, I'm not going to, I felt like praying and reading Quran yesterday, but today I don't feel like it. You've passed on the opportunity. If on the other hand, you say, this was a message, and I get the message, and I am now committed to change, that becomes the beginning of your journey. And so there's a lot written in a lot of detail about this whole experience of thunder and lightning that in the Sufist tradition. Go, is it Maghrib? Oh, it's Maghrib.
1 minute. 1 minute.
1 minute? Just not Maghrib.
My method is Maghrib.
Oh, yes it is.
Yes, it is.
Now the minute is passed,
Yes.
so it is Maghrib.
Technology.
Okay, we have to stop to pray Maghrib and break fast. Okay, guys, we have to stop to pray Maghrib and break fast. I hope some of you can break fast too. Maybe if they invent the technology, we could send them food.
It's okay to have food.
No, they have food? You guys have food? They give me thumbs up. Okay, alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but the concept of iman with shirk, of course, this is which I mentioned earlier in the halaqah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ, that most of them most of those who believe in Allah, or most of those who become believers, still are associating partners with Allah. So shirk and iman are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Although they should not coexist, but shirk often contaminates iman. Joe wrote a whole dissertation on shirk, so yeah, he should give a lecture about shirk and Islamic theology. Okay. So then in verse 15, another metaphor that often those who don't believe, their efforts in life is like as if they're extending their hands to drink water, but they're unable to do so. That goodness, the blessing itself, which here is symbolized by water. This is verse 15 that we're on. It does not, in fact, materialize because the bases are wrong. Okay. And then we get more into the dualities of Surah Ar-Ra'd, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in 16 says that blindness and sight are not equal, darkness and light are not equal, that in fact understand that although things are created with their contrast, but the contrast is there so that you keep in mind the inequality of things, and we'll see how that concept will develop in Surah Al-Quran. And then, as many believe that 17 is the heart and core of Surah Ar-Ra'd. أنزل من السماء ماء فسالت أودية بقدرها فاحتمل السيل زبدا رابيا ومما يوقدون عليه في النار ابتغاء حلية أو متاع زبد مثله كذلك يضرب الله الحق والباطل فأما الزبد فيذهب جفاء وأما ما ينفع الناس فيمكث في الأرض كذلك يضرب الله الأمثال الذين استجابوا لربهم الحسنى والذين لم يستجيبوا له لو أن لهم ما في الأرض جميعا ومثله معه لافتدوا به أولئك لهم سوء الحساب ومأواهم جهنم وبئس المهاد. So this is 17 and 18 that I've just read. Let's see what the study Quran says. Sends down water from the sky to the river so that the river beds flow according to their measure. And the torrent carries a swelling froth. And from that which they kindle in the fire, seeking ornaments or pleasure, is a frost like unto it. Thus does God set forth truth and falsehood. As for the frost, it passes away as dross. And as for that which benefits mankind, it remains on the earth. Thus does God set forth parables. Those who answer their Lord shall have that which is most beautiful. But those who do not answer the Lord, were they to possess all that is on the earth and the like of it, besides they would seek to ransom themselves thereby from punishment. So what is this verse saying? And how does it relate to Surah Al-Ra'd? Surah Al-Ra'd already established that the secret of so much of all of existence, with all the variety that you see, is that it is fed by one source, water. And although the elixir of life produces an enormous great deal of variety, all of that is an indicator to the divine. And that God creates things in dualities and contrasts. But how does goodness come about? Well, your first hint is the growth of thimar itself. You have a seed fed by water. The thimar, whether you have female and male pollinating or pollinating within a single plant, you have roots, you have a stem, part that grows underground, part that grows above ground, fed by the same source. The part that grows, water flows in that plant against the law of gravity, that it goes upward. But in all processes of growth and production, there is a froth. But natural froth is limited because God, as the creator, is efficient. But yet, creation that God creates takes a long time for it to be the state which we see it in, to be good and balanced. Think of the processes, natural processes of the earth. The natural processes of the earth are wholesome. It doesn't poison itself. It doesn't pollute itself. But it takes an incremental long time for it to be what it is, to resolve its dualities and its contrasts, and to resolve it to attain balance. When human beings intervene, they produce a lot of froth. So when human beings are trying to produce, as the Quran says, hulya or hilya and mata', their process of creation produces froth. And the froth is symbolic for that which is not good. The nature of goodness is unlike froth. It is incremental, and it exists in the long run. Is God promising that ultimately in all things, froth, nonsense, what is not good, will evaporate and only goodness would stay? Only if we allow God's processes to work. But not if we constantly intervene to prevent the settling of good and the constant production of froth. But this is core. Then we get now to the heart of Surah Al-Ra'd itself. Surah Al-Ra'd, remember that it is speaking to those Muslims and telling something, as we will see further, as to how they should approach change. And it's saying it's not an issue of theater and show. It's not an issue of scoring points. It is an issue. Remember that most of even those who tell you they believe, they don't understand faith. They even still have shirk in their heart. It is understanding that the nature of goodness, and we'll talk about that in a second, is what you must seek. And for goodness to take root, it requires time, determination, deliberation, and time. And for those who understand this goodness is what they receive in their just reward. But those who don't, as Surah Al-Ra'd itself will affirm in a second, that their fate on this earth and in the hereafter is one of loss. That all the material possessions that they will accumulate, in an instant they would be willing to give up just to get out of a tough spot that they put themselves in. So it affirms again that in the same way that darkness is not light, is not the same as light, those who can see and those who are blind, or being blind and seeing, is not the same. And gives you the heart and the key for what is needed to produce the process of good that avoids froth. That good, the lasting good that God speaks about, that is not froth. The heart and core of it. And look, it gives you literally like what do you call it? A recipe, cooking recipe. الذين يوفون بعهد الله ولا ينقضون الميثاق والذين يصلون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويخشون ربهم ويخافون سوء الحساب. So first, you keep God's covenant, but you keep your promises. I can't tell you how much is written on this point about keeping your promises. A Muslim doesn't betray. A Muslim's promise is supposed to be the golden standard. If you promise to do something, then people it should be as if it's done. If you don't learn to honor your word and honor your promise and honor your trust and honor your covenant, there is no path forward. and there are no shortcomings. I mean, there's no shortcuts, sorry. So, for instance, there's so much written in this context where say, just give you an example about that the Prophet ﷺ says, a hadith that is often cited in this context, 3 types of people the Prophet will personally prosecute in the hereafter. A man who gave a trust and then broke it. Any kind of trust. You gave your word and then broke it. من أعطى عهدا ثم غدر ورجلا استأجر أجيرا استوفى عمله وظلمه أجره. That you hire someone and that person does their job and then you fail to pay them. And third, رجلا باع حرا فاسترق الحر وأكل ثمنه. A man who abducts a free person and sells them into slavery and then takes the money. This is in response to people like Jonathan Brown, who sees no problem with Islam and slavery. The Prophet ﷺ, in this among many hadiths where the Prophet says, if you go around abducting people and selling them into slavery, I will prosecute you. In the same as if you hire someone and you fail to pay them, in the same that if you gave your word and you break it. Now, why is abducting someone and selling them into slavery important? Because then that was the major source of slavery in the pre-modern times. Slavery from war was a limited source because it had to go through a state decision to turn, not to trade or ransom war captives, but to enslave them. And states only did that as reciprocal punishment for the enslavement of their own forces. So when the Prophet ﷺ came and said that you can't abduct people and sell them into slavery, that's haram, that legally that strangled slavery as an institution, or was supposed to strangle slavery as an institution. So to try to now pretend that, well, oh no, Islam was always fine with slavery. Anyway, so all of that falls under yufuna bil ahd. So again, I underscore this. Ethics, morality. You are not going to forget the idea of reform if, as an ethical matter, you can't even hire people and pay them their due. If you can't even promise and keep your word, then forget all the grand desires of we want to be this, we want, I'm stating the obvious. It's not what you wear. It's not whether you wear a beard or not. It's not whether you put nail polish or not. It is at that level. Then, وَيَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَنْ يُوصَلْ. This is as a moral ethical theory is earth-shattering. Why? Because this is what 21. Why am I not finding it? Oh, am I looking at the wrong? For now. Who joined what? Oh, because it just says who joined what God has commanded to be joined, which doesn't really tell you anything. Okay. What is it that God commanded to be joined? natural bond that needs to be honored is what God commanded to be joined. So, the most basic and fundamental example, honor your parents. That's ma amara Allahu bihi an yusal. If you don't honor your parents, you've broken what God commanded to be joined. Loyalty between married couple. If you betray your spouse, it's betrayal. When these Muslims say, oh, well, secret marriages are okay. But wait, how about betrayal? Ethical thought is in many ways very straightforward. Okay? What else? God commanded that you take care of the poor. God commanded that you take care of orphans. That's ma amara Allahu bihi an yusal. What else? God commanded that you don't destroy the earth. God commanded that you don't even tear down a tree without just cause. And I'll give you a remarkable example in 1 second. Okay, so here are examples of what the scholars tell us are the types of things that God commanded that they be connected or as joined. Okay. So one of the companions is asked, Ma amara Allahu bihi an yusal. What is it? So it says, فيدخل إيصال الخيرات ودفع الآفات وعيادة المريض وشهود الجنائز. That every charity you extend, even visiting the sick, is ma amara Allahu bihi an yusal. Attending funerals, not saying I'm too tired, I don't want to go to the funeral. Wa ifsha is salam, even just spreading salam. Wa tabassum fi wujuhi nas, and smiling is ma amara Allahu bihi an yusal. Wa kaff al adha anhum, and not harming people. وكف الأذى عن كل حيوان حتى الهرة والدجاجة. That you also do not harm any animal, including a cat and even a chicken. Qadi Iyad was asked about the same verse. Qadi Iyad was a famous Shafi'i jurist. And he says, huh?
Maliki.
Maliki, sorry, Maliki jurist. So he says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ الْعَبْدَ لَوْ أَحْسَنْ كُلِّ الْإِحْسَانِ وَكَانَتْ لَهُ دَجَاجَةٌ فَأَسَاءَ إِلَيْهَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. That if a person is good with everyone, but he had a chicken and he mistreated the chicken, he's no longer among the muhsineen, among the good. Mistreating a single chicken takes you from the category of the good to the bad, and from the category of those who do not join what Allah has commanded to be joined. Examples of this are many. There are just so many texts we don't have the time for, but There's just so many. Dogs. There's an interesting report about a man who used to eat from the garbage, and then he found a dog, so he would share whatever he found in the trash with the dog. And that this man, the Prophet describes as among the muhsineen because he shared what he found with the dog. There are a lot of that. So, keeping in your covenant, joining, and notice it's a general command, joining what God ordered you to join, but it opens the door to ethical and virtuous inquiry. It's like saying, if you don't understand virtue, there's no path forward. And after that, you fear God and you fear accountability. It didn't escape the commentators that morality was placed before fear of God. In addition, you have patience, because the impatient will not prosper. This is not the path for the impatient. And وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ, and you pray. وَأَنفَقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً, and you spend both secretly and publicly. Imam al-Shafi'i was asked, that's why I called Ayat al-Shafi'i. Imam al-Shafi'i was asked, well, isn't this redundant? Because it says, مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَنْ يُوصَلْ, so giving the poor is joining what God joins. So why does it say later on, spend publicly and secretly? And Shafi'i says, because of the importance of this particular covenant. God will not bless a people who do not take care of their indigents. There is just, if you don't know how to take care of those who do not have, there is no path forward. And now notice, وَيَدْرَؤُونَ بِالْحَسَنَةِ السَّيِّئَةِ أُولَئِكَ لَهُمْ عُقْبَى الدَّارِ, and they will learn to repel bad with good. We're not talking about criminal penalties here. We're talking about the path for incremental change to goodness. For those who don't want to live in froth, but want to live in goodness. In order to do that, your morality has to be, I do not respond to evil with evil. If you do not have that morality, there is no path forward other than froth. And as a consequence, because Allah knows that this is a difficult path, Jannatu Adn, that they go to heaven with their spouses or their family or their loved ones who makes it to heaven. Salamun alaykum bima sabartum. This is the award for persevering, for your tenacity, because it is a difficult path. And then, to underscore this, in 25, as to those who break covenants, and do not, and sever what God has ordered to be joined. And then it spells it out. What is it that they do when they sever what God has ordered to be joined? They cause corruption on earth. يفسدون في الأرض. It spells out the obvious. Not keeping your covenants and not joining what God has ordered to be joined is causing corruption on earth. And because of that لهم اللعنة, they are cursed. وَلَهُمْ سُوءَ الدَّارِ, and the end in a bad place. Now, سُوء الدَّار could include consequences on this earth and the hereafter, because the bad abode, and you can fill in the blanks for the bad abode. I spilled on myself. I tried to finish the tea too quickly because I had no sabr.
It was too good.
And I was not among the patient. Allah punished me with some major corruption on my jalabiyah.
You got frothy.
Yeah, very frothy. It got very frothy. See, a live example of what happens. Do not do as I do, or you'll swim in froth. And your beard will have froth too. Okay. Now, there is, in Sufi Ask Tafsir, the passage on the streams and froth has a very beautiful treatment in Sufi Tafsirs. So I'll just read a sample passage and then I'll paraphrase it. Before I do that, there is a hadith, by the way, that every Muslim should know, where the Prophet ﷺ says, لا إيمان لمن لا أمان له ولا دين لمن لا عهد له. لا إيمان لمن لا أمان له. If people cannot trust you, then you have no iman. If you're not trustworthy, then the idea that you have iman is ridiculous. وَلَا دِينَ لِمَنْ لَا عَهْدَ لَهُ. And if you do not keep your covenants, your promises, then you have no deen. Again, I underscore this because yes, I do have in mind that, and sadly, Muslims do not keep their appointments. You know, the worst people with appointments are Muslims. Muslims say insha'Allah to mean never. Muslims often make promises that they don't keep. Understand that this is a major sin. It's not a small sin. If you are a Muslim and people cannot count on your word, cannot trust you, then you don't have iman and you don't have deen, and that's a major problem. When I see someone who's active in Islamic movements and they're not trustworthy in their business deals, then I know it's a failed Islamic movement immediately. I don't even bother with studying their literature, listening to their lectures, anything. If I see that they're not trustworthy in the way they handle money or the way they handle affairs, I know khalas. There's no way Allah will bless it. Islam was built on a foundation of ethics. No ethics, no Islam. Okay, now going back to the Sufi-esque tafsir. Remember that. لا إيمان لمن لا أمان له ولا دين لمن لا عهد له. So here's a sample. أنزل من السماء من سماء القلوب ماء المحبة فسالت أودية النفوس بقدرها فاحتمل السيل زبدا رابية من الأخلاق الذميمة النفسانية والصفات البهيمية الحيوانية وأنزل من سماء الأرواح ماء مشاهدات الأنوار والجمال فسالت أودية القلوب بقدرها. So what he's saying is that when Allah talks about sending water that flows in the streams, they understand that as Allah sending the water of love. And the water of love goes to the souls. And there are souls that are ready to receive the water of love and be nourished by it and grow. But there are souls, like arid land, that have akhlaq zamima, bad ethics. وصفات بهيمية حيوانية, and they have animalistic characteristics. And then these people, when the water of love reaches them, it becomes froth. And it leaves no effect. It slides right over them, just like frost does. And then they have some very beautiful passages about that the water of love have sparklings of divine beauty that shimmer before the eyes. And again, it is the eyes of those who are ready to receive that beauty that absorbs it, while the eyes who are preoccupied with gluttony and animalistic characteristics, it's froth, it's nothing. That metaphor is very important in Sufi traditions generally, because it plays a huge role in Sufi poetry. From experience, I know that the advice you'll often get from shuyukh is the water of God's love is flowing all around you, so open your heart to it. That's what often they'll tell you when you say, and when you say to them, well, how do I open my heart to it? And they'll say, the response that most typically you get is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, أَنَا جَلِيسْ مَنْ ذَكَرَنِي, that I am in the company of whoever remembers me. And they'll often say, do you remember Allah in your dhikr, or do you project yourself onto Allah and remember yourself in your dhikr? Do you want God for God, or do you want God because you want yourself? Basically, you're in love with yourself and you want just God to elevate you to a pedestal. If you want to go and put you on a pedestal, it's not going to work. and until you learn to long for God as God, not long for the self, and want God to serve the self. And then if you say, and I'm just telling you a long conversation, if you say, well, how do I not long for myself and long for God? And I will never forget the answer to that. Suffer. Suffer. Only suffering will teach you not to long for yourself, but long for God. I actually asked and said, well, how do I suffer? Because I was an obnoxious young person. And he said, if God knows that you want to suffer, for God's sake, God will make you suffer. And the Sheikh was right. Okay, where am I? All right. So already you see that Surah Al-Ra'd in the Sufi tradition plays a huge role, but let us continue with the journey. Okay. Now, where are we? ويقول الذين كفروا لولا أنزل عليه آية إن الله يضل من يشاء. This is 27. This is what already talked about, the teasing the Prophet, saying, why don't you have a miracle? It's the same thing. 28. الذين آمنوا وتطمئن قلوبهم بذكر الله ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. Now, this is again one of the most famous verses, perhaps in the entire Quran, and definitely in Surah Ra'd, but the entire Quran as well. Those who, when they remember God, it brings them comfort and tranquility. ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. With God's remembrance, tranquility is brought to the hearts. Of course, you can predict that no one has written on this verse as much as the Sufis have. I want just to share with you a sample of the discussions that take place around this verse, because there's too many for us to even come close to covering. Here it says, الموجودات على ثلاثة أقسام: مؤثر لا يتأثر، ومتأثر لا يؤثر، وموجود يؤثر في شيء ويتأثر عن شيء. فالمؤثر الذي لا يتأثر هو الله سبحانه وتعالى، والمتأثر الذي لا يؤثر هو الجسم، فإنه ذات قابلة للصفات المختلفة والآثار المتنافية، وليس له خاصية إلا القبول فقط. أما الموجود الذي يؤثر تارة ويتأثر أخرى فهي الموجودات الروحانية، وذلك لأنها إذا توجهت إلى الحضرة الإلهية صارت قابلة للآثار الفائضة عن مشيئة الله تعالى وقدرته وتكوينه وإيجاده. So they're talking about this idea of what can be influenced by Allah's remembrance. And then he says that there are three categories. There's something that can only influence but is not influenced, and that's Allah. And something that is influenced but doesn't influence, and that's physical bodies. But it is the soul that can both be influenced and influence. And the reason that he has this, that he's arguing for the three-part division, is he's saying that in order to understand how, if you are having trouble feeling that the remembrance of Allah brings you tranquility, learn to separate between the reactions of your body, which could be simply from bad habits, and the understandings of your soul of what the remembrance is. And experience the reactions of your body as if you are watching an allergic reaction that you learn to think of as an ailment, but not allow it to destabilize your soul. So, and he's talking in the context of people saying, well, you know, I will be scared and I will break into hives. And when I remember God, I still have hives, or I'm still shaking, or I'm still, you know. And it's saying, well, that's okay, because these are your body reacting according to habit. But your soul is a different matter. Anyway, it's much longer discussions. Wait. التصرف فيها لأنه مضبر من الأجسام وظهر هذا في القلب كلما توجه مطالعة العالم الأجسام حصل فيه الاضطراب والقلق والماء. Yeah, so okay, I left out this part. It says الإجسام اشتقت إلى التصرف إلى فيها لأن عالم الأرواح مدبر العالم الأجسام. وإذا عرفت هذا فالقلب كلما توجه إلى مطالعة عالم الأجسام حصل فيه الاضطراب والقلق والميل الشديد إلى الاستيلاء عليها والتصرف فيها. أما إذا توجه القلب لمطالعة الحضرة الإلهية حصل فيها أنوار الصمدية والأضواء الإلهية فهناك يكون ساكنا. فلهذا السبب قال ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. So I forgot this part. What he's saying is that if you don't feel that tranquility by in Allah's remembrance, then no, then you have a problem. And that is, you are too focused on observing the physical world. You only notice the movement of bodies in the physical world. Which means that in our modern language, you need to be less materialistic. And the more you decrease your reliance on material things, the more the remembrance of your Lord will in fact bring you tranquility. There's just so much written of these types of discourses. Okay, but let's move on. Where are we? Look at verse 30 where it says كذلك أرسلناك في أمة قد خلت من قبلها لتتلو عليهم الذي أوحينا إليك وهم يكفرون بالرحمن. 30 and they don't believe in the Rahman. There is a reported occasion for revelation here that could have only taken place in Medina. This is part of that debate of Mecca, Medina, where this is very late when the Prophet ﷺ, in speaking to the Meccans, trying to negotiate actually speaking to some of the disbelievers in Arabia, because it wasn't the Meccans. But in trying to negotiate a ceasefire, he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And they respond, we don't know what ar-Rahman is. And Muhammad now has two gods, one called Allah and one called Rahman. The only significance of this is just that it gives you a sense of why this whole confusion about whether it's Meccan or Medinan. It's not likely that that was an occasion for revelation at all. I have to say, I mean, although that event took place in Hudaybiyah, that event took place before Hudaybiyah, but it's not likely that that was an occasion for revelation. Okay. So the next important thing to emphasize is 31. What time is it? Oh man. It's 10 o'clock.
So?
Okay, I'm going to take a vote. And the vote will include people on the yeah. But you have to come conduct the vote.
Oh.
Vote conductor. Master of ceremonies.
Here's proposition A. Who's on the interactive? Turn on cameras. We gotta see you.
Calling them.
Hello? Come to life, people.
Michael and Naman. Assalamu alaikum. I don't think I actually know you. Friends of friends.
Okay. Proposition number 1. We continue for another hour, finish at 11, and inshallah finish Surah Al-Ra'd. Proposition number 2, we don't continue for another hour, and we continue Surah Al-Ra'd on Tuesday.
But then on Tuesday we only do Surah Al-Ra'd?
Oh, maybe I'll add a short surah like
Oh, you're right.
Sabbah
not gonna
Rabbika
happen.
al-A'la. You know.
Or we can make it a longer Q&A too. I mean, we can introduce other Q&As.
Sorry, I was driving. Salam alaikum.
Look, you spilled the
I
Coke.
spilled! Oh my god. Okay. Do you see? I always spill. Did I get you?
And you spilled it on my book. And on me.
I'm well known. I spill all the time. And it's a very funny thing because whenever I spill, I always spill on the sheikh. It doesn't matter whether he's sitting on my right, on my left, far in front of me, far in back. Somehow it always gets on him. This time, I just spilled on his book. And it's happened so much that now we take it as a sign of good
I think
things.
it's a sign. There's more frothiness. That means that we're doing something out of order, like we're rushing or something.
Yeah, I'm feeling like I'm starting to rush the surah.
No, don't rush, don't rush.
Yeah, we don't want to rush the
I
surah.
get that feeling as well.
Okay, let's do the vote then. Wait, Sheikh, what do you
What do you prefer? And does anyone want to suggest pros and cons so we can inform the vote?
All unanimous as long as Sheikh doesn't rush.
We're all unanimous as long as Sheikh doesn't rush.
If you took another hour right now, is that an hour with rushing?
If you took another hour now, is that another hour
Okay,
with rushing?
if I don't rush, if I really am honest and I cover everything I cover, well, could cover, if I'm being really honest, and do Q&A as well, then we'd finish at 12.
And no Taraweeh?
Okay, so Tuesday.
No, but we'll have to do Taraweeh.
You also have your talk tomorrow.
And you have your talk tomorrow with
We
Tarkas.
cannot skip Taraweeh in the last 10 days of Ramadan. That's haram.
I was saying about the Taraweeh, I mean not the Taraweeh, but for the talk tomorrow, for the professor's own well-being, maybe it's good to get him to get some break and rest.
For your
too.
own good being, because of the talk tomorrow with Tark Suidan, you need to have some rest tonight.
I get the feeling we should pause.
So if we do Tarawih at midnight, we won't finish probably till 2.
Yeah.
Sheikh has to be at that.
Yeah, we have to get up early to prepare for
Let's do
tomorrow's talk.
Sikhara.
Are you going to pray Istikhara for us, Rongi?
You gotta do it real quick.
Okay, vote without discussion. Just take a vote.
Okay.
Okay, how many people, so what we're voting on is either we continue on and finish tonight without rushing, right? So we would look to finish around midnight, inshallah. And we haven't had dinner yet either, so.
Who cares?
Okay. And then we do Taraweeh, and then we have the talk tomorrow. Or we, end now?
And now, and continue
And-
Surah Ra'd on Tuesday.
Continue Surah on Tuesday. Okay, so how many people vote for continuing on tonight? One vote. One? Okay.
Single vote.
And then how many people vote for continuing on Tuesday? Okay, I think
It's unanimous.
that is a pretty
Oh, wow.
unanimous.
See, we do things according to Shura and democracy. A message to the leaders of the Muslim world here and there and everywhere.
It works.
And it works.
It works.
Okay, I would have voted for the first,
I know you would have.
but
So let's do the first.
No.
That's why I didn't vote.
no.
If you prefer to do the first.
No, but he.
No,
he-
that's why I didn't tell you. 'Cause I follow the opinion of the majority.
He doesn't believe in self-care. So
Oh, that's an issue. Then the
sometimes-
second for sure.
Yeah, I think because.
I don't believe in eating. I don't believe in sleeping. I don't believe in rest.
It's unfortunate. I love all of those things.
I believe that the camel should just be let go.
Well, thank God for grace.
But the straw might break the camel's back.
The strong.
I think the camel needs the back broken, the legs broken, and the neck broken, and the camel needs to be buried.
No.
No, that's why we don't let the camel
This
like.
metaphor has gone out of control.
Yeah, for those who are not aware,
No,
this
no.
kind of progressed from tying your camel to somehow Sheikh becoming the camel. So yeah, so all of us here are responsible for taking care of the camel. The camel doesn't really want to take care of himself, so we have to do it.
Okay, so
So
with
thank
that,
you.
have Mafaz hold on back.
Okay, so Mafaz, if you can hang on so we can talk a little bit about tomorrow too.
But with that, then we will stop here. We will see some of you, I guess, in Taraweeh, whoever wants to join us.
Yes.
How many days of Ramadan is left?
How many days of Ramadan is left?
4 or 5.
4 or 5.
4 or 5.
That's sort of sad.
It's really sad. Yeah.
Can we pretend that we have another Ramadan?
Sure.
In the show up.
So hopefully we'll see you in Taraweeh tonight. If not, and then
We'll
we'll
see you
see you
Tuesday,
tomorrow,
inshallah.
inshallah. Tomorrow for the talk with.
Oh, tomorrow. Oh,
with
yes,
Dr.
tomorrow.
Suidan.
Oh,
And then
tomorrow,
and then Tuesday we'll finish inshallah. So, okay, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for the vote. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you soon inshallah.
I'll tell you.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.